We did a different approach with interviews this past week, and they did a great job answering and tying in a lot of information. Some of the feedback that Dr. Baltnight talked to them about at the end was making sure that they take the information that they know, begin to not only think about here's what my answer is, but we're moving, and you and I have talked with them a bunch about this, but we're moving out of a teacher lens into an administrator lens. So here's what I would do at my school is fine, as long as you follow it up with, and then what I see. And that's in every position, guys, that you apply for from here on out. When I applied to be executive director for student support services, I had to talk about, here are things that I see that are going well in this area, doing my research, because remember we talked about know what you're applying for. Here are things that are going well. Let me tell you what I would love to see happen in the next. So that visionary leadership, how you would take it and go with it. That's super important as well. Being familiar with all of those things that we have talked about, which was MTSS, talking about data-driven instruction, the law, knowing what your parameters are, and just putting on a good front when you go, being able to speak, make eye contact, dressing the part. Dr. Jackson always says, Marty Starnes, who was a longtime educator in Gaston County, always said, if you don't know it, you better look it. And so making sure that you dress professionally when you come in, they did a great job with that as well. So overall, it was a very good experience. And then tonight we're going to get to hear from both of our groups. The first group, or one of the groups, will be doing leading with inquiry and action. And the other group will be doing the new agenda, which is talking about transforming and change that occurs within the school environment and how you make that happen. So Dr. Lamb, do you have anything you want to add before they get started? And then we're going to close up with the video at the end and have a discussion.
No, go back to you have it in your shell, or you had it last semester in our shell. I went over it again. Dale's top 10 for interviewing, just generally. Make sure you go over those again. But before you go in, when you get an interview, make sure you know who it's with, know who your audience is. That's the biggie. That's the four types. You've got to know who you're interviewing with, and then proceed as you know to do. I won't go over it again because we've already done it. So I'm good.
All right, which group would like to go first?
The new agenda, I believe, wanted to go first, but y'all can override me if I am incorrect in that assumption.
Who's going to run your presentation?
I believe it was Emily. Yep.
Emily.
So Emily, if you will pull up your presentation, and if everybody will give their attention to the new agenda. This is a book that we did in our district as a part of the change that we began when we started looking at how do we transform our curriculum with our new instructional model that you've seen in each one of your Saturday sessions. How do we transform a district through instructional change? How do we make that happen to bring forth a modern environment for students? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, so we have the new agenda, and throughout this presentation, we will discuss the transformation that the existing education system would go through by using the 5 major drivers. Over the years, the education system has changed. How public schools have answered the call to produce graduates with skills to complete each respective era has changed from year to year. Our school systems are overwhelmed by the sheer number of technology solutions available, solutions that target various components of our districts, but fail to address other equally important and interdependent areas. So this leads us to an ever-repeating cycle of acquiring and abandoning solutions after they fail to meet the system's needs or to bring about a meaningful or positive transformation. So this cycle often leaving educators and superintendents feeling as if they are caught up in the storm, overwhelmed and perplexed. So many folks long for the past when life seemed less complex. We came to work, we taught from a textbook and a rigid curriculum. Today, we walk around with the world at our fingertips, and our students have access to information within seconds. Who remembers life without social media? Life without one-to-one devices? Even life before the pandemic, which opened our eyes to a lot of things that we can and will do differently from here on out. So this was a quote from the book that we really liked. Friedman points to a critical inflection point, which began in 2007, and it gave a rise to a new breed of innovations. So the iPhone was released, which caused Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn to reimagine their platforms. These were followed by a rise of big data analytics, and it created an acceleration of technological innovation. 8 years later, we began seeing a rise in artificial intelligence, human genome sequencing, and self-driving cars. And in return, we began to see a change in the K-12 education. The next generation of learning management systems, cheaper and faster classroom devices, and educational content turned digital. And this leads to a clash between technology and the traditional process, policies, and mental modes of the K-12 education are based off of several different factors. So age requirement of students to attend school, geographical constraints and zoning laws, unionized in some parts of the country and challenges for changing policies, federal and state and local competition with governance structures, national foundations with grant monies, which often dictates curriculum and their products. And this leads us to two fundamental questions. So why is the K-12 education the last frontier in technology adoption? And how can school districts successfully transform from traditional classrooms to a more modern and personalized learning environment? So digital convergence is the fundamental change needed at the national and school district levels to successfully integrate technology into the classroom and to use it to transform the student and learning experience. So digital convergence is the intersection of people and the ideas as they seek a unified approach to transform the existing educational system through technology adoption. So digital convergence is the successful combination of 5 major drivers of work, which allows technology adoption to occur effectively. They include leadership, instructional models, modern curriculum, digital ecosystems, and professional learning. And convergence is technically simple, but it's socially complex. So our school districts find themselves overwhelmed by the number of solutions in the industry today, which they're all claiming to heal the systematic problems with single point and nearsighted solutions. And these solutions that are ignoring the underlying cause of problems, and they're only offering us temporary solutions. So again, we're back to our quote here where convergence is technically simple, yet socially complex. And the book doesn't give detailed technological solutions or explore in-depth changes. However, it does give a practical guide for the leaders in the K-12 districts on how to approach technology integration and ways to understand systems and change management.
All right, so we are going to talk about what single point solutions are and how do we address them. So the barriers of digital convergence are single point solutions. Again, that is transitioning your school district to modern learning environments. There's many forms of single point solutions, and the greatest is being our natural inclination to think linearly and episodically. So there are different kinds, and often given the rate of change in school districts, they're often pervasive, they're temporary, they don't adequately address the certain factors that are complex and interrelated, only target some of the drivers needed for digital convergence, and it's often a result of the lack of coordinated foresight, participation, resources among all stakeholders affected by technology. And so these are just really short-sighted responses to the common challenges that we face when integrating technology. All right, so here are some cases to single point solutions. As you address one problem, many other problems will start to arise, and that also will need to be addressed. The examples that are given here, like you're going to need devices. Schools need to be one-to-one ratios, and then you may have a bandwidth problem. You're not going to have enough to support all the devices. And then, you know, devices are not being used due to inadequate training, or even the curriculum that comes with the training. And then the outcomes, students' outcomes grow worse as teachers are digitizing the traditional classroom. So they're just taking that traditional setup and traditional model and just throwing a computer in there and expecting it to be a 21st century learner environment. So these examples illustrate the common consequences caused by single point solutions. Given just a few examples of issues that could arise by single point solutions, it's easy to see the impacts that causes financially, intellectually, psychologically, and societally it can have on your district. All right, so often we face a lot of challenges in leadership, and here are some examples. So you face status quo over a century in the making, human emotions and self-perceptions defined by existing roles and responsibilities, mental modes of thinking that are deeply ingrained and reinforced over multiple generations. So kind of breaking out of that same thought that your past generations have had. Other impediments to your vision, including those imposed by local, state, federal government, as well as third parties, and well-defined structures, systems, policies, and procedures that are difficult to change. So just having a leadership position, we face enormous challenges. They're complex and they're most fundamental in the transition to modern learning environments, though. So teachers, staff, and other stakeholders often resist the transition to modern learning environments, and this resistance is often amplified by their inability to understand, comprehend, and envision what the transition details. Creating awareness around the initiative and providing routine communication are necessities for you and your district. So they really need that just repetitive communication of, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it. And making that transition as with all your stakeholders is super important. All right, so as we go into the different challenges, the first one is the instructional model challenge. So direct face-to-face instruction is predominantly pedagogy of traditional classrooms. And this is just throwing in digital technology. We get a very inconsistent dynamic, and it's not very smart in the way that we approach it. So digitizing traditional instruction the research has shown that it leads to lower levels of cognitive rigor. Students are actually showing successful outcomes in the classroom. So again, it feels kind of pointless when you just throw a computer into the classroom and expect it to, transform the whole district. Absence of model blended units of instruction. So some teachers plan effective lessons, but those are really just viewing the overall district, and this comes from lack of training. Again, those single point solutions, lack of, the technology, the one-to-one ratios, and all of those fun things that come with integrating technology. So the biggest thing, the takeaway here was to support teachers, an industry standard is needed by which we can measure the effectiveness of instructional design. And this is hard for districts because we often want to switch up every few years of what we're doing, how we're doing it, how we're implementing it. And we really need just something standard that we can keep and measure over time. Next, we have curriculum challenges. The first one is not a one-size-fits-all approach. So this ignores individual characteristics of the student, including the preferred learning style, strengths and weaknesses, and learning habits. When we design for analog repetition, we need to shift towards a more modern curriculum that centers the needs of an individual student instead of teaching all students at the same level. We ignore often the outcomes of learners. So traditional curriculum largely ignores the outcome of learners. They only demonstrate their knowledge by one means of representation. and it does not reflect their preferred learning style. So students only get assigned a grade and get shipped on to the next step of education, kind of like a very factory standard model. The digital resource challenges, the quote above highlights the challenges that get further complicated when digital resources behave differently than what they were promised. How often have we, been given, hey, use this in the classroom. It's going to, change the overall outlook of how you teach. And then often it just kind of falls short of what they promised. And we're often kind of left questioning, well, what do we do with it next? Another barrier, learning management systems that fail to meet the needs of everyone using it. And the availability of digital resources may become disproportionate within the system and can even complicate the digital dilemma even further. All right, the professional learning challenges. So teachers rarely receive the education beyond the basic features and the functions of new technology. And so support training really lacks that deep inquiry from its participant. It creates an isolated and disconnected experience, and it lacks any meaningful application factors for feedback. Oftentimes we get it thrown in at us and saying, here's how to use it, have at it. And that doesn't always, produce successful outcomes as a teacher or a student in the classroom. Oftentimes the technology is front and back loaded during the school year, so it reduces teachers' retention and engagement. Never in the middle of the year do we stop and say, hey, how are you doing? Do we need more training? Do you understand how to use it? It's just, here you have it at the beginning, and then here's how to finish it up at the end. And new technology is often delivered in a face-to-face setting. Quality and consistency varies by instructor, and it cannot be consistently reproduced. It's very often difficult to make it up if you were to miss it or really understand it. If you have to go to a makeup session with a teacher beside you or something like that, it's not the same. And to effectively make the transition to a modern learning environment, we need education designed for the 21st century and its learners. And again, the whole point is just throwing a computer in a student's face and not giving the proper training and instruction for the teacher really just is a traditional classroom with a Chromebook.
Monica, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry. All right. So turn of the century, technology was used to support instruction or aid, or just to be more of support model. And then in 2000 was the technology it was integrated more, but the ratio of student to device was 6.6 to 1. And then in 2004, Web 2.0 was introduced, and users can now create, collaborate, and share content. 2007, the new age of innovation, learning management systems, devices were more affordable. And then 2008 and 2009, the Great Recession came, and that led to budget cuts and layoffs. So today, we have evolved and adapted to meet learning needs of our students. So digital convergence is the fundamental movement needed to transform our traditional, I'm sorry. What?
That's okay. Let me see. Okay, so like Monica was saying, just like we mentioned earlier, the quote here, the digital convergence is fundamental. So Megan talked about that earlier. And we know that the modern learning environments require technology in order to support those 21st century skills that we're always talking about. But we also know that it's not just about what technology, but it's more about the how, as she touched on earlier as well. So now I'm going to ask a question. So somebody want to unmute, because I know we've been talking a lot. But once a district adopts certain technologies, what is the responsibility of the district in regards to support and implementation? So anybody have any ideas of what is our district's responsibility once that technology or anything, or the school, once that's purchased or implemented? Somebody
Provide
want
training
So
on
then,
how to use it.
Sorry, I heard provide training. Yes, you are correct. Anybody else?
I said fidelity checks.
Okay, yes. And that's where we were gonna go with that as well, is just making sure, just like with our students, that we're checking in to the progress and making sure it's used productively. All right, awesome. Thank you. All right, and then the district responsibility, that just goes, kind of the answer to our question is that the district must simultaneously address all the components of the education system to sustain and support technology integration. It can't just be purchased and implemented, it has to be sustained. Like Heather was saying, you have to have those checks to make sure that we're using that productively.
So the 5 drivers of digital convergence are leadership. That's the most important driver for 21st century teaching and learning. The next most important is the instructional models, pedagogy transitioning from traditional to modern into digital. And then the next is modern curriculum. It's the sequence and the scope of instructional content for the 21st century skills to be developed. The next is the digital ecosystem, where teachers and students can access those digital resources through the digital ecosystems. Then the professional learning is the next one. It develops the skills teachers and all stakeholders should have. Okay, the next is the framework, which guides, supports, assists, and allows individuality and answers critical questions. And it also gives a strategic plan to the school district. The next is the framework. As I stated earlier, it provides that flexibility. It's based on the needs of the districts. It's unique to districts. It provides individuality. It gives district autonomy, where some freedom is allowed, and it gives district choice. Districts can choose the plan based on the criteria.
As we move forward to transitioning to modern learning environments, we need to take the tone comes from the top, which starts and stops with the superintendent and the degree to which they believe they have the power to influence change and to move districts forward. Also, there must be inclusion of stakeholders as far as communication, common identity, and coalition building. Then comes the fundamental change across the school system. Superintendents and principals have to change how they lead. Curriculum writers have to change how they design. Teachers have to change how they teach. Students to change how they learn, and parents have to change how they perceive and monitor their child's education. The focus is on the learner. During the 20th century focus was what students were taught. In 21st century focus, the 21st century focus is a paradigm shift to the learner rather than to subject matter. Learner profiles are central to the modern learning environments, with students' unique learning habits, preferences, styles, strengths, and weaknesses of the learner. There's an optimized curriculum. The district must work internally and collaboratively to develop a knowledge map across the spectrum of K-12, K through 12 learning that defines what every student should know and are able to do. And finally, professional learning. Teachers facilitate that. They experience from a learning point of view. The professional learning is inquiry-based learning that requires demonstration of proficiency, and there is increased retention and practicality of professional learning. Now comes the framework in stages 1 through 3. Digital convergence follows a non-linear path. often requires the approach to be systematic and dynamic. Leadership efforts must continue to lead the transition to modern learning environments, but work in other ways may occur simultaneously and not in any particular order. The focus is on the 5 drivers, which are leadership, instructional models, modern curriculum, digital ecosystem, and professional learning. And each one of the drivers, there are interdisciplinary teams formed that ensure stakeholders throughout the organization can speak to the vision and to the journey of digital convergence. Success indicators. These are the building blocks of digital convergence, and they are action items that indicate advancement with within each stage. Each indicator is interdependent and requires collective participation and insight of stakeholders in all 5 drivers of digital convergence. So I'm talking a little bit about digital convergence in the stage 1 phase. This is leadership. There is this theory of action, and there's an engagement of stakeholders. Again, as I mentioned before, message comes from the top. The superintendent communicates the desire to leverage technology to transform teaching and learning, and invites all stakeholders into the process. As I mentioned before, cross-functional teams are formed and serve as they also serve as the digital convergence steering committee. A theory of action, which is essentially a cause and effect, such as if we're going to do this, then we want this to happen. A theory of action is developed for the transformation of teaching and learning through digital convergence. Stakeholders are identified and engaged in activities around the theory of the action and the construction of the vision of the modern learning environments. Now we're going to go to instructional models. The instructional models, of course, as I mentioned earlier, in every single driver, there is a cross-functional team. And this one is formed to explore new instructional models. One person is designated as the owner. They begin conversations about a newly developed or a newly defined instructional model that includes use of learner profiles, which are blended and personalized learning and competency-based education system. The cross-functional team also begins conversations, adopting a framework for assessing rigor, as well as adopting a framework for 21st century skills. Next, we have the modern curriculum. At this point, the district begins to explore a common blended unit, a common blended unit plan across all subjects, courses, and grade levels. And then we go to the digital ecosystem. This team is formed to explore this district's actual digital system. Again, a cross-functional team is established, and they establish also a vision about its digital ecosystem, including the purpose, the users, the systems, subsystems, and functions, and how they will support and align to the district's instructional model. Finally, there is professional learning. And for professional learning looks different from professional learning that we have experienced in the past. One person is designed as the owner, and professional learning is inquiry-based. This is the final ingredient for the modern learning environment. It determines the teacher's ability to use technologies in ways that facilitate personalized learning. A team is assembled, and they are also members of the steering committee. And with the professional learning, they assemble a team of diverse stakeholders, principals, IT staff, instructional coaches, curriculum writers, and teachers. As I mentioned earlier, one person oversees all the professional learning and is empowered to make decisions. These need to be clearly established team objectives with resources and adequate resources and priorities.
So stage 2 continues to build on stage 1 by solidifying the new direction of the district. So in stage 2, that's where the real work really starts to begin. So again, in leadership, some of the focuses are awareness of the new vision and its branding and alignment. So the message again comes from the top. The superintendent communicates to stakeholders the successful development of the vision in the modern learning environment. That environment creates a vision deck that is developed and delivered to all stakeholders. And there also is a district common language glossary that is developed and is published in order to maintain, in order for everyone to be on the same page as with the delivery of the language and the words that are being used to convey the message of the modern learning environment. This is maintained and updated over time as well. The brand is also defined with a logo and to increase the visibility and the transparency of leadership. That logo speaks to the overall vision and it serves as a memorable symbol. The work of the digital convergence is aligned to the district's strategic plan and it ensures it remains a priority and at the front of mind. Next, we're going to move to the instructional model. It's focused on defining what the instructional model is and assessing rigor and 21st century skills. So the district-wide instructional model should be defined in a way that is intelligible and easy for principal, teachers, and other stakeholders to understand. The framework for assessing instructional rigor should be developed and finalized in this stage as well. This framework should also be intelligible for principals and teachers and should clearly define effective and ineffective teaching practices in the modern learning environment. There should also be an agreed upon framework for assessing 21st century skills. This ensures that students are being assessed on their competencies and mastery of concepts rather than standard assessment performance. When you're looking at these competencies that students should have by graduation, the district should review state and national standards. So they could use the Common Core, ELA and math standards, as well as C3 framework for social studies or the next generation for science to come up with a model that will help them to support students. Finally, assessment should be developed that provides students with multiple ways of representing their learning. They should be kinesthetic, visible, visual, verbal, and according to their preferences and strengths. So let's talk about modern curriculum now. It's focused on assessing digital content, finalizing the common blended unit plan, and developing model blended lessons. So the district will conduct an assessment of all of its digital content, including purchased content and any free content teachers may be using. So some of that digital content, some examples of that might be Discovery Ed or Brain Pop. Some other ones that teachers may use are Crash Course or Khan Academy. And the district wants to look at this so they get a better understanding of how digital content is currently being used and create a plan for developing curriculum that is aligned with the instructional framework. The district will also develop a blended unit plan that is aligned with the new instructional model across all subject areas, courses, and grade levels. And finally, the model digital blended lessons are developed and aligned with the new instructional model. These model lessons are available in the digital ecosystems, which we'll talk about next. So the digital ecosystem is focused on defining, assembling, and assessing the critical components of the ecosystem. There's a team that is developed and it's assigned to the instructional model and curriculum to collaborate to identify the clear purpose of the ecosystem as well as its user groups. After that, the team works to identify major systems, subsystems, and all of their functions. And this allows the stakeholders to gain a better understanding of the ecosystem and all of its parts. The district will then obtain a learning management system or an LMS as an integral part of the ecosystem. And this will serve as the house for the digital educational content. The modern learning environment brand is then extended to include the digital ecosystem, and that ecosystem is given its own branding, and it is given a system to provide effective communication for stakeholders. This new digital ecosystem brand serves to promote awareness, engagement, and understanding of this new ecosystem. So earlier, the district assessed the digital content, but in the digital ecosystem, they're going to look at the digital tools that are being used. Some of the tools that we use could be Class Dojo, Edmodo, Animoto, and one of the favorites is Kahoot. And these assessments ensure that all tools currently being used can be identified and integrated into the context of the ecosystem's purpose, its users, and its components. Finally, for professional learning, is focused on developing the plan, the processes, and the personnel to ensure staff and other stakeholders gain the education they need to be successful in a modern learning environment. So the team will develop an implementation model to outline the necessary resources, timelines, and milestones to successfully implement professional learning to its teachers, its leaders, and its other stakeholders. And this implementation model creates a framework to ensure that teams prepare each professional learning program and make sure the processes are efficient, effective, and most importantly, repeatable. So the professional learning plan is developed and it is consistent with the implementation model, and it includes timelines and milestones for success. And the plan should also include an ongoing professional learning through a variety of mediums such as online and remote learning. In order to get this done, we have professional learning coaches who are identified with the digital convergence. And after the coaches are identified, they are prepared with the knowledge materials and the time to support the initial cohort of teachers who are to be trained. Then the teachers are selected and grouped into professional cohorts that are consistent with the district implementation model. And last but not least, the teachers, the coaches kick off the teacher cohorts with face-to-face sessions that set expectations, build awareness of tools and resources, and most importantly, generate excitement. This session should introduce teachers to the district's overall vision of the modern learning environment, the new instructional model, the blended unit plan and model lessons, and the digital ecosystem.
All right, y'all, brace yourself real quick and take a deep breath for digital convergence stage 3. You may find this layout a little bit familiar because I straight up stole this from Laura and Wanda, but here we go. So in stage 3, the district has shifted into top gear. So strategic indicators and the drivers, the 5 drivers at this point, are all about sustaining and building on the momentum it's gained through the implementation of the modern learning environment. So under leadership, at this point, leadership should be sharing recent and relevant successes from the first 2 stages with all the stakeholders. This is both internal and external. Gaston County does this through sharing good news, as Superintendent Booker does regularly, as well as through publishing newsletters, sharing successes at board meetings, and various other ways. The district should also be communicating next steps that will be taken with stakeholders so that a common vision and purpose can be shared. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay, thank you. Leadership should also train school leaders in change management. This mitigates, this is a big word, resistance to change that may be occurring. So we're all familiar with, teachers may be resistance to change. Anybody is resistant to change. So leadership should train in that change management. School-based leaders should also create, facilitate, and communicate conversations centered around the need to change to this modern learning environment. That also helps mitigate that resistance to change. And finally, under leadership, the district leadership, this would be the superintendent, must create a means of assessing progress towards district goals, as well as to formalize a process for reflection that can be used across the whole district for planning and feedback purposes. So for the instructional models driver, the district simply must identify a group of teachers and place them in a cohort that will pilot the new pedagogical processes and assessment methods and share these results back to the district. So for example, Gaston County Schools has used many cohort models that you may be familiar with, such as I know Modern Teacher recently, high school, at the high school level, or a Modern Teacher cohort. Pinnacle recently was another cohort in the past couple of years. But Gaston County Schools has used the cohort model several times. We're also in a cohort, right? So moving on to the curriculum, modern curriculum. Additionally, model blended units must be created and be able to be utilized by teachers across the district. So this is under, this should be under modern curriculum, y'all. In high school, Gaston County Schools is creating unit lessons at the district level, and that teachers can use and plug into the learning management system. So this is, high schools use Canvas, elementary and middle schools use different things. We've used Google Classroom in the past. The district must also address gaps in the curriculum and work to fill those either via free or paid resources. Can you guys hear me okay still? Make sure. Okay. I'm moving on to oh, there it is. Sorry. All right. Just popped up on my screen. So again, under modern curriculum, we need to develop and utilize these model units by teachers across the district. They should already be in place, right? And they should be in something that's easily shared and easily implementable across the district. And finally, we need to address those gaps that we may find and fill those. So under digital ecosystem, in order to sustain the momentum there, the district must establish regular meeting dates and evaluations. So the book calls this establishing a cadence. Gaston County Schools' regular meetings with principals, assistant principals, coaches, vendors, board members, testing coordinators, all sorts of other stakeholders. So there is that regular cadence that, and that goes back to, we need to, the words are eluding me at the moment, but anyway, we need to have check-ins. We need to have regular check-ins and see where we are in the plan. Additionally, to ensure that all goes to plan, there should be a hierarchical rollout where a select group of internal stakeholders receive the first round of updates before everybody eventually gains access. So of course, this is to test for any glitches, any bugs that might occur on a smaller scale, so that those can be addressed before a larger scale rollout occurs. So the book calls this the go live date. We need to establish a go live date, and we need to work in increments in order to have that rollout. And then finally, professional learning in stage 3 is all about school-based learning through learning coaches. So I know that earlier on, I think it was Alex talked about coaching and trainings and things like that. So that's definitely what stage 3 is all about, is really implementing that on school-based level. So teacher cohorts and other sorts of things, and having that training in place. So Gaston County Schools has various teacher cohorts, which I just mentioned. Of course, we're in one currently. TIPS also comes to mind. This is for beginning teachers. Modern Teacher, I've already mentioned, is another one. But ultimately, however, it's important to remember that finally, it's all really about the students, their proficiency, their growth, and their success as lifelong learners, as outlined in the vision and mission of Gaston County Schools, are addressed in that student outcomes metrics of the book. So the essential question, what does the future of digital convergence look like in Gaston County Schools? And I think I've stolen somebody else's thunder on this one. But what do you guys think the future of digital convergence looks like in Gaston County Schools? I spoke a little bit to that, of things we're doing now.
I believe you mentioned a lot about how you need to use cohorts to strategically try out some of the digital opportunities that we want to move towards. Also using smaller rollout dates before you do your bigger rollout. Also looking at the fact that our county is going to be using a variety of cohorts, and not just looking at one particular aspect of digital convergence, but using many various types of digital convergence, and that some areas are going to be more on the beginner level, and some are going to be have experienced a longer amount of time, and so they're going to be progressing a lot faster and be a lot further ahead. But I think I can't remember whose point, the most important part would be, I think it was Ms. Wanda who said, look at the fidelity of it all, that the fidelity is going to be a huge piece of it, and that so it's going to be an ever evolving process, and as far as what digital convergence is going to look like for our county.
Absolutely, Daphne. Thank you. That was a great response. Does anybody else have any thoughts? Okay, so your exit ticket is to, this is very important to follow the instructions very closely. So find a photo that represents your idea of digital convergence as we have outlined it. So I want you to copy and paste this photo into the chat, but don't hit send yet. Okay, so I think the idea here is that we're all going to send this all at once. Okay, and like literally flood the chat with photos, but don't hit send until we say go. So I think we'll take, does a minute sound too long? Okay, we're gonna take a minute. Let's find a photo that represents your idea of digital convergence and copy and paste that photo into the chat. So hopefully this will work. And I apologize that you folks cannot see my beautiful face, but I was a little concerned about my internet stability. Here it is for those of you who need to see that. About another 15 seconds, I think.
I don't know if it's just me, but can you actually put a picture in the chat?
Is it working?
I'm not sure. I don't think it is.
It may not work.
I don't think you can, Heather. I think you have to put a link, so we can move past that part.
We can. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. We could modify that to for a future presentation to be you know, your 3-word definition of digital convergence or something, but for the purposes now, thank y'all for listening. We appreciate it.
Very good job. That was a lot of information, right? So it's important when you go into being instructional leaders for you guys to understand how decisions are made. I'm going to share my screen briefly, and I'm not going to go through a lot, but I just want you to see what you're talking about. And I'm sharing my screen on my phone, so I don't know what that's going to look like. So just hang 1 second. Okay, right there. You might not have done it. Let's see. When I do this, can y'all see my family? Yes, no?
Not
We see
yet.
you. We see you. Oh, well, no.
You still see me. Let me try to share again. Hold on 1 second. You don't want to see me. That's the whole purpose. I may not be able to do it. Let's see. There we go. Maybe. I don't want that. Okay, well, what I was going to tell you is that I got the luxury when we, as a district, went through start broadcast, 3, 2, 1. Now, can you see my screen?
Yes.
So we started off with in our district, and I was a principal at the time. And the reason I wanted us to go through this book, and I'm going to go through this really quickly, but the reason I wanted you guys to go through this book is to understand the why and the how behind what you do at a district level and how that work filtrates down into the school, and then your role as an instructional leader in the school. So of course we identify our why and our how. And like I said, I'm going to do this very quickly. but we went through and we talked about what is a modern learning environment. We then began to create, here's what our classrooms used to look like. This is what we want out of our classrooms. Then the theory of action, our if-then statements. If we as a district do this, then this is what our schools should do. And then as a principal at Hawks Nest who took on, I was one of those pilot programs that you talked about. Let's put it in place and see how it works. I sat down with my staff as the instructional leader, not because the district told me to, but as the instructional leader, I said, if our district does this, we should be able to do this. But we needed to take it a step further. So we said, if our schools do this, if in your classroom you do this, what should our students be able to achieve? And will the change we're trying to make, will it meet the needs of what we're wanting to do for our students? So as a school leader, we took it a step further to say, as principal, I'm telling you, our district's giving us this. Let's talk about as school, if we do these things now, how is that impacting our students? Then we talked about our mission vision going in with that, but then we created every one of our Saturday sessions, you've gotten to see our instructional model, correct? And we've talked about at each level what that instructional model looks like and how this instructional model guides everything academically that we are doing. And then we looked at our curriculum and we went through that component. And then we started the modern curriculum so that we are looking at our standards. If you're an elementary person, you know through and through what this 4, 3, 2, and 1 means. If you don't, we need to talk. But that is our learning progressions. They've started those in the middle, and we've started this at the high. And then from there, my teachers were able to say, okay, a student who is proficient, this is what their learning targets are based on a standard. Here is their lesson. And y'all have heard, I think everybody's heard how we talk about learn about it, practice it, and evidence of learning as the 3 components. That's something we're doing K-12. And that's how we began to implement that modern curriculum. After Hawks Nest for an elementary school started implementing, we went back and we revised and we talked about this works, this doesn't work. Our district for professional development pushed out through the modern teacher platform, because then it allows every teacher to take where they are and meet their needs. Because on that modern teacher platform, if you go into the quick check or whatever that pre-assessment is you do, and you pass it, you don't have to do that module because you don't need that module, as to where your peer might need that module, may need to go through all the steps of it. Did we roll it out perfectly? Not necessarily. I wouldn't always say. Stop share. But we went through these same steps that you were talking about. What I want you to take away is that as the instruction in your building, when the district rolls out an initiative, you have the power to make it happen successfully at your school, or to let it be a stumbling block at your school. And you've got to figure out, and you've got to get engaged from the beginning. Some of the questions I wrote down in your during your presentation. What's the problem with a digital tool with instruction, using it for traditional instruction? What's the problem with that?
It's just, it can be just substitution, and it may be shelling out money for something that we really don't need. So if it's not enhancing what's already happening in the classroom, why are we funding it, right? So.
Absolutely. So if you're going to do something new, it needs to make it better, right? Don't just do new for the sake of it's a tool. It needs to be better. It needs to make the instruction more meaningful, the engagement more meaningful. Another question, it said we needed to, I believe this was Megan talking about, we need to have a standard. We need to put that standard out there. It needs to be structured. Don't change every 2 to 3 years. I hear that 110%. Tell me why we would need to change more often. And then I want to talk about what I mean by that.
Did you want Megan to answer that, or do you want anybody?
Whoever, anybody on the call. Why do you think we would need to change more often than every 2 to 3 years in what we put out?
I think change maybe is the wrong word, but I think reevaluation is definitely a good word there. I think adapting. We definitely need to change in certain areas, maybe not all areas. So
But why?
reevaluating to stay. Yeah. So I'm Melissa
You're
Man.
on the right track. Keep going.
I think we just need to go with whatever is best practice and whatever,
Yeah.
we need to follow the data and do what's best for our kids. And so if we find that what we are doing is not what's best for kids, then it's important that we change it.
So one of the things I was going to say, and y'all are dead on, and Megan was right with what the book's saying. What it's talking about is you need to have a general structure. What I just showed you with the instructional model, it didn't have ready math in there anywhere, did it? When it talks about a modern curriculum, it didn't have anything so specific that you're stuck to what you're doing, but it had a structure there. And then what you have to do as an educator, as an instructional leader in your building, make sure that the changes you make are for the best interest of kids, not always the best interest of teachers. Many times we don't make the necessary changes because it's going to be a hard push and a hard lift for our teachers. Would y'all agree? So let me ask you another question. When your principal comes back and starts to tell you about the things coming and going, are they like, oh my God, there's one more thing? How does your staff feed off of that?
Yeah, I think I can't remember who had this in our presentation, but you know, the leader should be like the leader. They should set the bar and set the tone and set, you know, like be excited and exude enthusiasm for whatever it is. So because whoever's under them is definitely going to follow suit, right? So yeah.
So my comment to that is, as instructional, and I'm not being negative, I'm really just telling you, I love this book for this reason. As the instructional leader, control the controllables. Make sure that you realize if there's things that you're going to have to do, that's not your point to go back and cause grief among your staff. Because when you go back and you're like, oh my God, they're telling us one more thing we got to do, and this is going to be a lot of work, you're creating headaches for yourself, because you're going to have to deal with those people for the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 6 months while they're implementing. You've got to think about, I would go back to my staff, and I remember when we went into COVID, and y'all, I'm saying all this to say, I'm not the perfect principal by any stretch. That's not what I'm saying. But whoa, Nelly, sorry. One area that I did do a good job was in helping keep a good culture. And when you keep a good culture, people want to work for you and you get the work done, right? So one way you do that is by figuring out how to find the good in what you're doing. So when something comes along, I remember with COVID when they said, we're going to do remote teaching. Don't raise your hand, but think about that time when everybody was at home. Did you get on the computer every day and stay with your kids all day on the computer or all morning on the computer? Or did you just do a check-in, or did you not even do that? I will tell you that I met with my teachers and I said, teaching is not an option. That's what we're paid to do. We're going to meet with our kids and we're going to provide instruction. So you're going to do some lessons on a video and push it out. You're going to do some lessons in person. By in person, I mean kids are on their computers, we're on our computers. And we met with our kids every day. And we had the highest growth that next year we came back, because not only did my kids get instruction the whole time they were gone, but my teachers were meeting in small groups in the afternoon, and they would meet with a small group and then they would turn around over here and to help their kids with their homework. And they would meet with a small group and then they would turn around and help their children with homework, because we all had kids at home with us. But we didn't lower the bar, because I said, what do our kids deserve? And they answered me. They said they deserve instruction. Then how are we going to make that happen? And remember, we want to be the very best school, and we want people to say, I choose Hawk's Nest. So what do we have to do to make that happen? And they said, we got to teach kids. Do you see how I didn't own that decision? I set the bar by asking the right questions, but I never went into it and said, oh my goodness, y'all, there's a pandemic and we're going home and we're going to have to figure out how to make all this happen. And I just don't know what we're going to do. Do you see the difference in the delivery model? You as an instructional leader have to understand where you're going and then understand the value of how you lead your staff. One of the things said with professional development, you're that we don't do professional development midstream. And as a district, we typically don't. We are with elementary stuff. But the other thing I wrote down in that is I want you to remember who determines how you use your mandatory work days in your building. Sometimes there's district training, but then the rest of the time, who's in charge of those days? The instructional leader in the building, right? So make sure if your staff needs training, know what that is. If you have a big initiative, if you're doing, I remember when we did M-Class the first time, if you're doing M-Class, then break it down month by month. What are we going to focus on with M-Class to make it successful? All right, we're going over a little bit. I'm sorry. I'm going to turn it over to the next group. Does anybody have questions? That was a lot of information, and you did a really good job bringing it very clear and concise down to the fact that it starts at the top and comes down. Remember that you're the top of your building, and how you bring it down is going to determine the success of your kids.
I only have one question, Dr. Payne, is how do we
Yes,
do?
sir.
How close were we to the mark?
What do
How do we, yeah, how well do we represent the book?
Oh, I think y'all did a great job. Y'all got out exactly what I wanted you to bring out of the book. I wanted you to do the book so that I could talk to you about, here's what the district does. Here's all that back work that people don't realize gets done. And I didn't know it got done or that it happened until I went to district office. But there's a role of the principal to make sure that that comes down the right way to their staff in order for it to carry out.
Thank
Okay, good job. Absolutely. Who's going to drive the next one? Who's going to present their presentation? Heather. All right, y'all are on.
All right, so we worked with the book Leading with Inquiry and Action, How Principals Improve Teaching and Learning. So one of the things that the book points out quite obviously and upfront at the very beginning is that as an administrator, you are the agent of change in your building. You're either going to be a good change or bring about a good change and be a good leader, or you're going to bring about changes that are not so positive and possibly be marked as a bad leader or a poor leader. The thing is, as leaders, we all want to be great. But relatively, it is unknown what makes a great principal or what makes a principal be awesome, good, outstanding, so forth and so on. It's very hard to predict what that could be and what it consists of because of all the different things that principals have to face. So here we have the 5 main focuses of principals and in their leadership role in their building. So the first one being accountability. This has to do a lot with making sure that there's equal focus on not just outcomes, but as well the authentic use of data and how you're implementing the use of data throughout your building. There also needs to be incentives that support instructional innovation. As well, you also need to be able to give your staff autonomy, but in the same vein, make sure that you are regarding the organizational constraints that might be put out there by your district so that you don't have a rebel on the loose in your building. Then we have to consider how do principals and leaders in the building manage student diversity. And when we talk about diversity, it has to include all of the elements of diversity, such as equitable and fair learning, authentic learning environments for every student, being aware of other diversity factors that include language, able-bodiedness, gender, gender identity, religion. The list on diversity goes on and on and on. And principals are responsible for making sure that they are creating a culture in their building where every person feels like their diversity is being accepted and respected. Then they have to consider the globalization factor. It becomes the it becomes the responsibility of the principal to make sure that they have a good balance of presenting technical skills, as well as for a lot of our students, and especially in certain areas of our district, that the students are being taught English skills. So language and how they need to be able to perpetuate the growth in language so that our students become more marketable in the global competition. As well, there needs to be a call for better preparation in math and science. So when we're talking about globalization, we generally think about, okay, technology has to be up there, but not only technology, do our students have the skills for English? And when I say English, I don't just mean our non-English speakers or our English language learners. We've got students here from our own country that still need to master the skills of English because technology has been such a huge part of their lifestyle, and they've came up with their own lingo, their own language, to the point where now our students have a difficult time even speaking and writing in complete fluid sentences. So working on that skill as well, and that's become a real pressure for principals because ultimately that is who the responsibility falls on. So not only do we consider accountability, student diversity, globalization, competition, there's also, well, when we talk about competition, we're talking about the global competition that we're preparing our students for. Now we even have to think about school choice, how schools are competing amongst themselves, even within the same district. And one of the things that we're finding is that if you're a particular school, you are not going to be the school that's able to go out and just get the students the newer students who can come in and boost your scores. So what you have to realize as the leader is, I'm not going to be able to get new students. So then how do I provide a rich and meaningful education for the students that I already have in my building? And then we have to look at community, district, and school relationships. We talked a lot about that during our CAP and our SKIP projects that we did during this class. How do you develop that community and district and school relationship? And not only is it a development of the relationship, but school leaders are responsible for managing those relationships and maintaining a balance. So the district needs to be happy, and you need to make sure that you're meeting the expectations of the district. You need to be making sure that your staff and your students are happy. And as well, you have to make sure that parents and community leaders who are supporting your school are happy. And if we could only do one of these things, being a great principal might be a wonderful job if you only had to pick one. But what the book points out frequently is that a principal is responsible for maintaining all of this. What we have to recognize is that no one is great alone, but the perspective of leadership puts you in a lonely place. So while you are working with all of these people and working in tandem with all of these groups that you have to make sure that you are including all of your stakeholders, still at the end of the day, when it comes down to your school, you have to be the one to make those decisions. And so it can be very lonely. We hear in this book about the ever elusive, mythical, great principal. And throughout the book, it alludes to a particular principal and how he was offered a new school because he's so great where he is. And they want to now put him in a low performing school to see if his greatness can really continue and bring that school up to the point his current school is. It's not that simple because it relies upon the resources that you have available, and that comes down to financial, it comes down to your staff, it comes down to some community support, it comes down to everyone who is going to be a part of your school community. So in all reality, every district will look for the great principal, but every district also knows that it doesn't exactly exist. Yet, it is still the expectation that administrators be great principals. So how then do we do that? And that becomes the struggle for a lot of principals. Thus, here is the result. A lot of principals and a lot of people in leadership, school leadership find that it is just too much, and they are at a place where it would be much easier to quit than to try to attain that title, that coveted title of being the great principal. So principals and leadership, school leaders have three options basically. They can ignore what's going on in their schools, they can react to what's going on in their schools, or they can take charge. So if we're talking about how do you become a great principal that can improve teaching and learning in your schools, then we need to consider the inquiry action model.
So for principals to improve teaching and learning, they must lead with inquiry and action. And we must first know what the book describes as the inquiry action cycle. The inquiry action cycle is used as a framework for real change in the educational setting. Using a planned, purposeful, systematic process for collecting information, making decisions, and taking action leads to a culture of change. And we do all of this in our communities of practice, which we know as PLCs. A principal cannot accomplish instructional improvement alone, but a successful principal is needed to bring the inquiry action cycle all together. So first, the inquiry-minded, action-oriented principal must look where the problems occur. And the book identifies 8 potential problem sources. And Heather, if you'll hit that one more time, please. Oh, where are our, there they are. There we go, 8 potential problem sources. So these sources are parents, teachers, students, the community, the school board, the superintendent, the state and national government, and the principal. Often the problems of practice are linked to what teachers do and not on the whole student. So when focusing on the whole student, problems can be identified and prioritized more effectively. When identifying problems, all practice regarding learning and equity and developing the whole child, it engages the entire community, allowing for all people to take responsibility for the choices, and then they move towards acceptance, which leads us to the next step. Once a problem occurs, a PLC must go to work. They must use dialogue. They must have these critical conversations to own the problem. And this starts by asking questions such as, what students were affected by this problem? What do they need? Have we met their needs? Have we made previous attempts to deal with the problem? Accepting the problem leads to open conversations about root causes, context, responsibilities, and intended equitable outcomes, as the acceptance figure on the screen shows. The next part of the cycle is the theory of action. So purposeful change starts with an expression of intended outcomes and expectations. For example, what is the goal? Therefore, the theory of action states both the desired outcomes and the proposed actions aimed at achieving the stated outcomes. Basically, if it states that the PLC is going to do, what is the PLC going to do to get to where we want to go? The if-thens. A theory of action is the right place to start conversations about solutions, and it provides a concrete roadmap for taking action, which is the next one. So the next step is to move the theory of action into actual practice, to actually take action. During this activity, teachers take actions they believe will lead to intended outcomes. Taking action allows teachers to enact and discover by gathering information, trying new behaviors, and seeing what happens. Enactment and discovery lead to action. In the take action phase, the inquiry-minded, action-oriented principal's role is just a primary one of support. They need to know the best practices. They need to help their teachers know these best practices and what to look for, and then they can locate necessary resources to make these happen.
Okay, and next up we have evaluation. Heather, I don't see it on there, but we can roll with it if it doesn't. There we go. So evaluation, we all know, is the tool for organizational learning and change. It's systematic and intentional. I think those are 2 key words from the book. It either is a systematic look at the operation of a program or the outcomes of a program. That would be your problem of practice. So when you're doing that, you're looking for evidence that answers the questions about fidelity, impact, and most importantly, student outcomes. So some of the questions you might ask with your PLCs or with your team, your leadership team, is what we're doing working? What are we actually doing? What does it look like? What does it actually look like that we're trying to accomplish? Is what we're doing aligned with the student outcomes that we want to receive? And what do we want to know about what students are learning and what is the impact going to be on student learning? And then what else is happening to the students that may affect these things? So evaluation is all based on these student outcomes. That's our most important goal, but also it's never ending. So the cycle continues. And we know that in order to evaluate a program, you have to collect systematic data, and that's ongoing. Your data is always ongoing, but you don't stop at the evaluation phase. You reflect on that, you start again. So evaluation leads to further actions. You might ask yourself, your staff, your team, are we satisfied with the results that we're seeing? And if the answer is yes, that doesn't mean you stop the cycle. That means that you say, well, okay, we're happy with what we've got, but how can we strengthen it? Kind of like when we looked at the working condition survey, how can we strengthen these things that are already good at our school and make them better? And if the outcomes aren't what we want to receive, then how can we change? How can we modify? So reflection is experimental. It's observatory. We're observing it and we're critiquing. And it always loops back to that problem of practice. And Heather, you move on. So this in a nutshell is the inquiry action cycle that Heather just pulled up and that Paris that I presented on. But each activity is essential, but it doesn't necessarily always have to be done in a linear order. But you're always promoting change. The goal is to modify your practices. And ultimately, as we all know, we're here for the kids. So it's ultimately to improve student learning. And it should create a school that is able to talk to each other, able to have this dialogue, these crucial conversations, and also they're able to act reflectively. And the key to this cycle is it's continuous. Even if things are great, you keep going and seeing how can we strengthen it, because we always are looking for better. But it takes the principal as the instructional leader to make sure that this is happening in their building. They can't do this alone. But the principal is in charge of making sure that this data is being collected and that this cycle is continuing and continuing so that we are trying to be the best leaders that we can be in our building. And now let's think about this before we move on. I want you guys to think about the inquiry and action cycle that we just described. And can you think of ways, and I hope we all can, that you can use this cycle as an administrator, or possibly and hopefully, I think that we've all used this, probably a part of this cycle in our own buildings. So can anyone just kind of give a shout out of how they see parts of this being used in their buildings or in their PLCs, SIT teams? Any ideas? Some problems of practice maybe that you've had in your building?
I'd like to add, at Greer Middle School, we have this problem of dispersal because we're so short-staffed. We're having to send kids to different classrooms each time a teacher is absent, and we came up with this plan. The problem was dispersal. We could not account for the kids. We did not know that they're there because people were not taking proper attendance and they were missing out on vital instruction. And so we kind of had discussions in our PLC as how to approach the problem. And we came up with the plan that the 2 teachers who would have been there on a 3-man team, we would just split that 3rd class down the middle so that we would have those students accounted for. And they came up with an attendance sheet that was shared with all of the team members, that we could actually do attendance for these kids, and then the data manager would then go and collect the attendance information from that. So kids were accounted for, this would not affect attendance, and also they would still receive the instruction, and we would keep consistency in terms of expectations on our teams.
Thank you, Charlene. Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on.
Okay, so basically as a group, we've recognized that the inquiry action cycle is essentially what we've been using throughout the entire program as we've worked on the papers in each class. Each evidence has focused on a problem of practice and prioritized areas that relate to the core of every school's mission, which is to promote student achievement and prepare our students for life in the 21st century. Using the inquiry action cycle as a principle will help all of us stay focused on using data and distributed leadership to drive instruction that will have a positive impact on student learning. So if you will think back to what feels like forever ago, last fall, we worked on the APSL, where we formed a PLC, a collaborative group, to research, analyze data, and identify a specific learning need. Wait, go back to APSL. Okay, I'm going to talk about APSL. So then we led our PLC through the research in the best practice when we researched the area of need, and strategies and best practices that would kickstart and maintain growth. And the plan we developed used distributed leadership, and there was not just one person alone that was making every decision or that was responsible for the implementation and evaluation of the parts of the plan. And then we included formative and summative assessments that we put into place to make decisions about next steps. So we followed that inquiry action cycle. It was really should be a never ending loop, and we're constantly checking in on that plan and are we making progress towards our goals. So then in the spring, we started on our APTEL project, and we researched teacher empowerment and leadership best practices. So then we looked at improving the teacher empowerment to make an impact on student learning. So we collected our school specific data by involving teachers and gaining their input about their perception of teacher empowerment and leadership in our schools. And we use that same distributed leadership approach to form a team and to collaborate and analyze the data that we got from our surveys and then on walkthroughs that we had conducted. And then together we developed a plan to address gaps and grow teacher leadership and efficacy in our buildings. And again, we would create these checks to go back and check on the progress of our plan. And do we need to make changes? Is the plan working or not? So then this past summer, we worked through the steps of the inquiry action cycle to analyze the school's organization and management procedures and then make recommendations for improvement. We researched our federal, state, and district requirements regarding programs and scheduling. We analyzed our current master schedules. We gained teacher input on the master schedule and then developed a new master schedule that was aligned with all the required laws and district initiatives, and then submitted our plan to administration. So again, we went through the process of conducting research in a specific area. We looked for gaps and places for improvement and presented the idea for possible implementation.
So I will pick up with the skip and the cap and see how it is that it follows the inquiry action cycle. So if you remember in task 1 for the organization analysis, we were to conduct an analysis to determine the climate of our school presently and determine if there are any existing communication gaps between internal and external stakeholders. And task B, we were to determine the gaps in communication. Now, when we formed our parent engagement cadre that we worked on, Mrs. Reed is a part of that, we realized that the problem at Greer, to be specific, is that only 26% of parents agreed that they were influential decision makers. And the parents who were showing up for academic and social planned events were those parents whose students did not have behavioral or academic concerns. So we saw that as a problem and determined that we would create a fix for it. We went to task 2, where we identified physical and human resources, and most of what we came up with as possible solutions, we determined that we could use Title I funds to fund those objectives. Moving on to the marketing plan, task 3, developing a plan of action. This would tie into the theory of action, if then. So we determined that if we were to restore the PTO, which was non-existent at the time, increase parent communication using apps like Talking Point and Reminder, or Remind, and increase parent conferences or teacher conferences, and also increase the number of parent involvement activities that we have throughout the year, then that would improve our stakeholder community involvement plan. And then we would evaluate that through the next TWC survey. And also our task was also evaluated by our peers as we put them in Blackboard. So that would be part of the cycle there for the skip. Can you move on to the CAP? Thank you. The same thing applied for the CAP. So we had the task 1 was to conduct an analysis of the climate using the TWC and determine any related empowerment, leadership, or facility or resources. Sorry, we were to conduct an analysis of the climate using the TWC data related to empowerment, leadership, facilities, resources, and time. In terms of that, we determined that the problem at Greer again, we wanted to increase the amount of participants who completed the survey, because presently we only had 87.23, and we thought that if we had 100%, then this would be great data for us to make crucial decisions off of. Going to task 2, we were to assess the level of cultural competency by assessing the school vision. And we came up with activities like placing it on the school website, making sure that it is present in email attachments, and placing it on our LMS systems so that it is visible to all our stakeholders at one point or another. We also had the problem where we needed to create improvement in declining areas, such as time, school leadership, and teacher empowerment, because looking at the TWC, we saw that there was a small number of persons who polled in, or that data needed to be increased if we were to have some kind of improvement in our school culture. Task 3 required us to come up with an action plan, which displayed the progress of the school related to the culture, advocacy, and safety, that demonstrates the timeline of the project. And that would be our action, not our action plan, but our marketing plan, and the recommendations that would have come out of our PLC or parent engagement cadre that we had formulated for this. In evaluating the action inquiry cycle for this one, can you please go back? In evaluating it again, we would have had peer reviews done in Blackboard on the marketing plan that we would have submitted. We also had presentations to our admin team and to members of our PLTs, and we also will look for increased improvement in the next TWC survey that is coming up based on what we have implemented. All right, you can go ahead.
All right. So based on what we learned about the inquiry and action cycle, want to talk about some of the roles that the inquiry-minded, action-oriented principal plays in implementing a successful collaborative inquiry action cycle. And so that's something that requires that teachers take ownership of their teaching and the challenges associated with it. And at the same time, that cycle, when implemented correctly, makes such ownership possible for teachers. So it's important to understand that teacher ownership and teacher leadership go hand in hand, is something that the chapter that I had really talked a lot about. Principals are both facilitators and focusers. Principals facilitate teacher leadership, and a lot of that is part due to developing a school culture that can affect
Alex, we lost you, I think.
important work that that teachers and other staff do in order to make this cycle happen. So some of the things that I had down for what facilitators, what principals do as facilitators and focusers is, one, motivate teachers.
You're still going in and out, Alex.
Yeah, Alex, we don't hear you.
Meaningful and effective professional development. We talked, I think the last group talked about, making sure that, that it's sustainable. And then mobilize or allocate resources for instructional improvements within their school. And then another big part of the inquiry and action cycle is the collaboration piece. Facilitators and focusers collaborate. That means that they're creating a legitimate time and content for communities of collaborative practice. And also making sure that teachers understand what is expected of them in that particular collaboration, and to making sure that they're nurturing those high expectations for all students. And then we go on to making research-based, data-driven decisions. And the book talks about being based on 4 principles. Number 1, evaluating the current available information that you have within your school. Determining information needed to support that decision making, or the decisions that you make within your school. Making sure that you operate within the context and the perspective of the school's organizational processes, and obviously what I talked about before, assessing your school's culture. And then recognizing, this can go one or two ways. Rewarding and celebrating accomplishments. Principals play the role of being inclusive of multiple cultural perspectives. Actively recruiting and retaining a diverse body of teachers, and then having those teacher leaders to share and model effective practice for beginning teachers, and even in some part using data to dismiss ineffective teachers as well. You can go on to the next one. And the other roles are the buffer and the bridger. This is a key role for principals in implementing this inquiry action cycle. The inquiry-minded, action-oriented principal is successful, which you see the graphic there, when the buffer and bridger sides of their roles are sort of in balance. So we talked about creating and crafting an environment that supports your school mission and vision, fostering high quality instruction, implementing high expectations, allocating resources. Another big thing would be eliminating distractions that impede student learning, and then ultimately evaluating teachers in order to make sure that they are setting those high expectations, and that inquiry action cycle is happening in their classrooms. So although we describe the facilitator and focuser and the buffer and the bridger as separate roles, they are both integrative and they overlap with one another, as you can see. Recognizing these roles as such, does reduce the complexity of the job that principals have in implementing this inquiry action cycle. So, bringing all those forces together into a working whole or school, helps the roles that principals play accomplish that collaborative inquiry action cycle.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and apologize to my team for my presentation skills because I don't know what's going on. But anyways, so now to the part about what it takes to do the inquiry action cycle is we have to do these 6 things right here. We have to collaborate, obviously, to accomplish improvement in the school. Principals don't do this alone. They have to incorporate everybody else that's surrounding them, the community, the teachers, the teacher leaders, and the community. If they relinquish the control to gain, they have to relinquish control to gain participation. This means that there must be teamwork, partnership, and requires dialogue. They also have to do concentrate on concrete practices. So they have to do action with evaluation and reflection to produce the movement. There has to be this to help the build, to focus on the concrete reality, not something that's abstract. This action is with the evaluation and the reflection and then the movement. And this also helps helps build the culture. They also have to do work on the core technology, focus on the teaching practices that impact the student learning. They have to reform reforms must be embedded in the core technology of the schools, and it must move the school towards a coherent system that's focused on improving its core technology. And that was alluded to a lot in the previous presentation as well. One key thing is we have to talk about, it takes getting the community involved. Principals must look to the community and the world in which the school sits in, and they must seek out those partnerships in the community to help with make the school decisions. And I think another key thing is that they talk about in the book is teachers as leaders. When the principals use those teacher leaders in the building, they use their skill and expertise and position them as leaders, the inquiry action cycle can account for strengths and weaknesses and accomplishments and efforts towards improvement in the school. And this model, teachers can be leaders without being an administrator. So again, when we talk about what it takes, is collaboration is key. So at the center of this all, students are at the center. The principal must work with the leadership. They must work with the community, and they must work with teachers in order to help teach students and help them grow, because that is our job to do. So some of the challenges of this model is principals have to make sure that they understand that there will be some teachers resisting, because collaboration can be hard. And a lot of teachers are resistant to change and new ideas. There's also a lot of people like to avoid uncomfortable and conflictive situations. And that usually comes from them resisting the new change. And this also is, there's a lot of disagreement in this model that can, that people are kind of, when they introduce those new diverse ideas, that it can lead to conflict and disagreement, because ultimately people don't like change and they will resist it. So ways that principals can avoid these challenges is they got to realize that, and they have to recognize that they should not be blaming teachers because it's natural for them to resist it, the change. They need to instead anticipate the resistance and offer and create incentives to the teachers. And they also need to make sure that they're creating an atmosphere where teachers feel safe to dissent or talk about what they do agree with and what they do not agree with. When, if they do not allow a safe place for teachers to assimilate to the model and they talk it out loud and they can't tweak it, then teachers will do their best not to do it. So in the book, it talks about the diffusion of innovation. So it talks about ways that the principal can do things to avoid resistance and build participation. The principal needs to work to create an environment that establishes the conditions for success. So they talk about the diffusion, the spread of the innovation. They talk about the relative advantage, the degree to which the inquiry action model can be seen as better than the idea or program or product that it replaces. They can talk about the compatibility and how consistent that the inquiry action model is with the values and experiences and needs of the potential adopters. They talk about the complexity and how difficult it can be to understand and or use, the trialability, the extent to which the innovation can be tested or experimented with before commitment to the adoption, and then observability, so the extent to which the innovation provides tangible results. So all in all, we all know that we can do it. This model is a more inclusive and it's more meaningful. It works because it gives voice to all people in and out of the school, because remember, collaboration is key. It is flexible and can be adapted to fit each unique school. And principals should be inquiry minded and action oriented. So one of the quotes from the book that I really liked was, leading with the collaborative inquiry action style can make it happen. You can do it in the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, and leading with the collaborative inquiry action cycle can help you make it happen.
Y'all did a good job. You did that quick. That was a big book to do that quick. But do you see how those two models sort of overlap in some ways? I love, love, love that you guys tied in your coursework with the model, and how the way that you went through your courses and the projects you did, the needs assessment analysis, and all of the different components of your coursework you did within your projects. One of the things that, Heather, you said that I think is so important, and I wrote down, is that earlier I talked about how you are the instructional leader. How you present it determines how they receive it. And that does not mean they're always going to be like, yay, we're all on board, let's go. You have to build that culture to where they understand how they can voice an opinion, an appropriate way to do that. If you're at the point where you can't do it without being totally ugly, you got to be able to, I used to tell my staff, come to my office, shut the door and say, hey, I'm coming in to vent. I don't need you to fix it. I don't need you to do anything with it. I just need you to hear it. And say what you got to say, that's fine. Versus in the middle of a staff meeting saying event. So making sure that they understand, come with a solution to the problem. What can we do in place of? Come with questions to help you better understand the problem, I think is so important to ending up carrying out something you know you're going to carry out. Because there's times you have to make things happen that you may say, this is really not what's best in my belief, but there must be a bigger picture as to why we're doing this. Who else has something to add to this?
Is it my turn yet?
It's your turn. Yes, sir.
Okay. If I only ever worked with K-12 people, I wouldn't really have understood one of the most serious problems with inquiry-based learning. If we go back to Angie and Shylane's presentation, they talked about the evidence track in the MELS program, where you have a problem and you go and gather your data and we tell you what data is your validated data. Having worked in one of our other doctoral programs and teaching them methodology with some folks who weren't K-12 people, one of the problems in inquiry-based learning is, what is data? What is the important data? Where do you go get it? What is it and where do you find it? And that I've even had that debate in the MELS program. When we tell folks it's your standardized tests that are on your report card, you know, for each of the evidences, we tell you what data you're to go and get. That when we have some folks who are in community college, small college, city, county government, we have those doctoral students. One of the problems that we get into there is they don't always agree what data is or what the relevant data is. And you have, I've even had that problem with K-12 people. And so that leads you to the notion as principal, you have to tell folks what's most important and what the relevant data is. I'll give you an example of what this is kind of around the horn here. I had a group that I worked with in Asheville back in 2013 and 14, and several of them were at AC Reynolds High School. And when they started their app cell, they wanted to bring in things like basic skills tests and a test in a civics class. And what are those tests that they give in CTE in high school?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got your credentials and you got your all sorts of different things that you got. Yeah, my wife does this. I should know this.
Yeah, and so what I had to, you know, I had assumed that they understood that no, those things are, while might be important in a particular class, that's not the data that a school administrator needs to be most concerned about. School administrators, if you're in primary, it's your M-class data. If you're in elementary, it's EOC. It's your it's EOG data. It's your quarterlies. All of those kinds of things. And so one of the things that you have to get an agreement or an understanding with your teaching staff, even in K-12, is this is what's important. You know, we use teacher working conditions survey. We use parent survey. Some districts give those. You know, we use report, all the things on the report card, you know, teacher quality. This is what matters. This is the coin of the realm. And one of the hardest things to do when you're doing inquiry-based learning is get people to understand that this is the validated data that we use. These are the important things. Teachers will think, well, I think this is important and I think that's important, and we're going to pull this data. One of the projects that I have early on when I teach methodology to doctoral students is we have to look at the efficacy of data sources to get them to understand that everything that, because it's on the internet, doesn't make it so. That in every industry, in every business, we have standards of things that measure whether we're being successful or not. And some teachers will just not buy into that. One of the things, if you remember back to the first town hall before the first class, I don't know if you folks got to attend that or not. I think I invited you all, but I told you the very first night, if you're one of those people who think standardized tests don't really show what a kid knows and aren't important, get out now. Our job is to make a good number go up or a bad number go down. And the good numbers are the ones that are on the state report card. That's what we're talking about. The bad numbers are, you know, discipline, like we talked about last semester, suspensions and those things. But we don't get to determine what's important. But as principals, we have to make sure that we enforce, this is what's important. This is the data that we use. Don't tell me that, well, this kid just doesn't test well. No kid tests well if he doesn't know anything, myself included. And so you can't go down that rabbit hole. You must be the leader in that. This is the data that matters. This is what's important in our school. This is what's important in our district. So we have a problem. Here's our data. We set about doing our research, best practices, talking to our teachers, talking to our community, trying to find solutions to these particular problems. But we can't get bogged down in debating whether this is a problem or not, or whether this is important or not. You have to set that agenda. And this sounds incidental, but I'm telling you, that's one of the biggest fights that you will have, especially at the 9-12 at the senior high school level. It will be one of the biggest fights that you have in terms of what's important, what the data is, and what data we ought to be using. I appreciated the shout out in terms of, I was asked a question last week by somebody who should have known better. And the question is when the waiver expires in North Carolina and students will have to take the praxis like they do in South Carolina, or our doctoral level MEL, we have doctoral level MEL students as well, from the curriculum instruction program, from the EDCI, from the doctorate over there. We just finished with a group of them this semester. They have to take the praxis. South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, and Tennessee people that we have in the program, they all have to take the praxis. North Carolina still has a waiver. North Carolina people won't have to start taking the 5412 praxis until the fall of 2024. And so I was asked by somebody who should have known better, when you go to the exam, are you going to stop doing the evidence portfolio? From what you just read in the book about inquiry-based learning, what is the answer to that question?
Isn't that kind of the whole point, is to learn how to do the thing? So the answer is no, we're going to keep doing it.
Well, so I might as well have been asked, are y'all just going to quit, having classes and just let them, be enrolled in the program for 2 years and then give them a degree? I mean, that's basically what you're asking me. So the whole notion is you were taught in the format that we changed to in 2016 to mirror what we expect you to do in modern schooling. Now, we tweak it every year, but the whole notion of the evidence is, as Angie and Shalane pointed out so eloquently, is that we taught you in an inquiry-based, a continuous improvement loop, because that's what you do as a principal. It's a continuous improvement loop, and that is the whole purpose of inquiry-based learning, is to continue to improve all the time. We don't just say, oh, we got that, now we're good. We're always analyzing our data and trying to get better all the time. That's what they pay us to do. So that's what the inquiry model is all about. It's a continuous improvement. And you can call it whatever you want, but that is the whole notion. Now, somebody may have cheated, and I hope they did. Has anybody looked at what the PSYOP will be for you next semester? The last of your 6 evidences. Does anybody know what that one will consist of?
Was it like a total kind of school plan?
That is correct.
Other parts of the other evidences, right?
We will pull pieces of the first 5 in a not a random or disjointed, in a very logical sequenced way. We will pull individual pieces apart and we will build that school improvement plan. Why do you think we had you do a graphic organizer of the action plan, the professional growth plan, the marketing plan, the cultural advocacy plan? That will be your working document. When you put those together, that will be your working document of your school improvement plan. That has been the notion from the very beginning, that this is an inquiry-based model that teaches you how to build a school improvement plan based on continuous improvement. That's what you would be expected to do at your school. That reflects modern schooling. That's the whole notion. I'm done.
So I would say, great work tonight. That was a lot of information. We kept you longer than I think we've kept you the entire time, but I think it was good stuff. And I hope you see the relevance to the curriculum instruction we've done, MTSS, the evaluation tool, all of those components, I hope how you see they all fit together, that as the instructional leader, as the principal or administrator in your building, you wear the hats of many. And you've got to surround yourself with the right people, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, and then all work toward the common vision and mission of your school. Your vision of always doing what's right, or your mission to always do what's right by children and always make decisions for that. I appreciate how much you have put into this semester. I feel like you have grown a lot in presentation. I feel like you've grown a lot in just the quality of work that I got the first week versus what I got at the end. I told Dr. Lamb, it has been really good to watch your commitment and your determination to showcase all that you have to offer and how you are prepared to start in one of our programs, hopefully next year. I know next semester we are working on your Saturdays. I will get those out to you as soon as we can. But we're going to try to do some pre-training with you that you would normally do in your, if you get an administration position, that will also help prepare you for that evaluation time. But I just wanted to say I enjoyed this semester with you. I hope that you guys definitely continue to reach out. If you have questions, you know, you can call me, especially when you get that AP rolling, you have discipline questions. I will be your go-to person. But along the way, if you need anything, just let me know. And I appreciate, again, all your work. Make sure that you have everything uploaded so that I can finish your grades tomorrow. Okay. Anybody got questions for me? Yeah, I've worked all day. You've got a big day tomorrow and you're exhausted. So go get some rest, and thank you again. Have a great week.
Before you go, let me look and see. I gotta move that out of the way. And so next semester, for those of you who are inquiring minds want to know, you will have Dr. Stone and you will have, I see he hadn't put his things in yet. You'll have Dr. Stone will be your instructor. Dr. Bullis will be your coach. You will lack the PSYOP. You will only have one. Since we doubled up this semester, you will only have one evidence due. And again, it's no new work. It is an amalgam of the 5 previous evidences that you had. Many of you have been, I think, Emily sent me some today. I hadn't got to them, but I will right after class. We were in a series of meetings today. Work on your competency folio. Remember, get your log uploaded in your competency folio for this semester, your 80 hours. Work on your artifacts in your competency folio. You ought to be able to just about knock that out over the holidays. You only have one evidence. Remember, it's no new work, so that should be a breeze. You'll have some standards projects with Dr. Stone, and Dr. Bullis will be your coach that'll be working with you. I'll be hovering in the background as always. 2 semesters having to see me every week is enough. We'll talk about school visits. Dr. Payne asked me not to this semester so that she could be involved more with you. We'll talk about school visits, what we're going to do for those in the spring. Trying to remember if there's anything else. Dr. Stone generally meets his classes on Monday and Tuesday nights, so I don't know which he's going to pick for y'all. He's got 2 classes, but it's generally Monday and Tuesday that he meets. He also likes to go at 6. If that's a problem, let us know before next semester. If you need to wait until 7 like we've been doing. Did we go at 6 in summer? Yeah, we went at 6 this summer, but he likes to go at 6 during the year because he does his classes from his office. So I think that's pretty much everything. Competency folio, you got all of you completed all your evidences this semester. Did a great job on that. Got both of those knocked out. competency folio, make sure you do that, upload your log. Dr. Stone will be in touch before long. He'll have you your weekly schedule. It'll look like it always does. Again, it'll be 1 hour, either Monday or Tuesday night. Dr. Bullis he's in, I think he does about what Dr. Payne does. I think he's in Wilkes County. And he's really good. He's very personable. You'll like him. You'll like both of them a lot. You'll have a lot of fun with them. They are both extremely people-oriented folks. You'll have a good time with them. All right. Anybody have any questions for me in terms of any housekeeping before we close out the semester?
I don't have one in particular for you, but I'm looking at the discussion board and we cannot upload into upload the group project. Unless I'm doing something.
All right, I don't know that I'll be able to fix that. What we'll have to do is, I will try to go in and create let's just do it right now. Let's see if we can fix that problem right now, if it'll let me do that.
And it might just be user error. Did anybody else try to upload it?
I tried to and I couldn't either.
All right, so let me see if I can do.
Can we have a vote on the time for next semester instead of emailing Dr. Lam? Those in favor of 7 p.m. say aye.
Okay, group project.
7 does work nicely. Charlene, yep.
You getting it, Dr. Lamb?
I'm trying. We'll see if it's going to work or not here. We'll know in 1 second. There we go. Group project created. All right, so this is an assignment Dropbox. It's right here on your main menu there at the very bottom where it says group project. And you can upload it right there and it will go straight to the grade center and be counted for Dr. Payne to average that in. So right there it is.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Dr. Lamb.
Yes.
Hey, I know I don't speak for everybody, but if there's any way possibly put a plug in with Dr. Stone, if it's got to be one of those days, Tuesday is probably better because, I mean, as far as 6 p.m. on Monday goes, our athletic events are on Mondays and Thursdays, and there's just no possible way I could be on at 6 o'clock p.m. So I know I don't speak for everybody, but
Alex, I'm right there with you on the high school at Monday at 6 is tough. So I know.
Yeah, I know. I get it. I completely get it. That's why I only teach on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. I did a Monday night this time because I had to, and my attendance was not good. But I knew it wasn't going to be good. My high school folks couldn't come, but we didn't. You know, there's only 4 nights of the week. We can't have classes on Friday night, and so I had to have a Monday night class. And you're exactly right. And we went as late as we could to try to help folks. But you're right. Monday is a terrible day for secondary people. I get it. I know. So what I'm going to do right now, while I'm thinking of it, is I'm going to send him a text that y'all prefer Tuesday night, and y'all prefer what time? 7?
6.
Yeah.
time doesn't matter to me. It's more of the day.
Yeah, the day is priority for, I know, high secondary people.
I just know that elementary people have to be at work at 7 a.m. and it is now 9:38 and I'm hungry and y'all are killing me. And I'm sorry, I love you all.
Good night, Angie.
I'm a night owl, but I gotta eat. I gotta shower. Like there are things to get done. I love you guys.
Anybody opposed to 6 o'clock?
No.
So why don't we come to a good compromise? Let's do 6 o'clock on Tuesday if you can, Dr. Lamb. And you have to do like I do. I'm in a hotel room. You order your food and have it sitting on your table, and you just try to sneak it in as quick as you can in between each one.
Well, mine's also the dogs barking, like the one's barking at me because she wants to go out. I'm like, that's why my camera's off, walking through my house, letting dogs in and out.
All right, I just texted him. We'll try to make that happen. Sounds good.
Thank you.
sir. I
All right.
appreciate it.
Everybody have a good night. Thank y'all.
All right. Bye-bye. Dr. Payne, I'll just go ahead and end us tonight. You eat your dinner and get some rest. We'll talk later.
Thank you. I'll be talking to you soon.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.